They say the battlefield reveals a man's true character. For Sergeant Luke Harris, that truth came in the form of humiliation. He'd given everything for his country, blood, sweat, and more than a little pain. But when a blast left him limping, the one man who should have had his back turned on him. Captain Douglas Kane wasn't just a commanding officer. He was a man intoxicated by his own power. And in front of the entire platoon, he made Harris the punchline to his cruel joke. If you've ever seen injustice like this, and believe no soldier should be disrespected for their sacrifice, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories that need to be told. What Kane didn't know was that the soldier he mocked had endured far worse than physical wounds. Harris had survived loss, betrayal, and a darkness Kane could never imagine. And when fate handed Harris the perfect opportunity for revenge, the battlefield tables would turn. Kane would learn a lesson in leadership the hard way. This is the story of how a wounded soldier brought a decorated commander to his knees. The sun beat down mercilessly over Fort Bragg's training grounds, casting long shadows across the dusty parade field. The men of Bravo Company stood in rigid formation, boots planted, eyes forward, sweat trickling down their brows. At the center, Captain Douglas Kane paced slowly like a predator, sizing up his prey. His jaw was set tight, his eyes sharp and cold. Everyone knew he thrived on moments like this, moments where he could remind his soldiers exactly who held the power. Then his gaze fell on Sergeant Luke Harris. Harris stood at attention, his uniform crisp, his medals catching the sunlight. But the limp in his right leg was unmistakable, a souvenir from a roadside IED in Kandahar. Kane stopped in front of him, staring for a long, uncomfortable moment. So, this is what passes for an army sergeant these days. Kane's voice carried across the field. A man who can't even keep up with his own men. The platoon stiffened. A few soldiers' jaws tightened, but no one dared speak. Yes, men, Kane continued, his tone dripping with mockery. This is our shining example. The hero who thinks a Purple Heart gives him a free pass to slack off. He smirked. Maybe next time we should give him a desk job at the VA so he doesn't slow us down. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Harris's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept his face stone still. Military discipline demanded silence, and Kane knew it. That was the real cruelty. Harris couldn't defend himself without facing disciplinary action. Kane leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough for only Harris to hear. You think your little war wound makes you special. Out here, it just makes you weak. It was a surgical strike, a humiliation designed to strip a man of dignity without laying a finger on him. The formation was dismissed soon after, but the sting of Kane's words lingered in the air. The men avoided Harris's eyes not out of shame for him, but in silent solidarity. They knew Kane had crossed a line, and deep inside, so did Harris. He didn't show it, not yet, but a seed had been planted, and one day soon, Kane would learn that some soldiers may limp, but they never bow. Captain Douglas Kane's rise through the Army wasn't built on selflessness or brotherhood. It was built on precision, ambition, and a knack for being in the right place at the right time. He came from a long line of military men. His father, a decorated colonel, had drilled into him the belief that leadership was about dominance, not respect. Kane embraced that philosophy, wearing it like armor. He didn't just command, he ruled. And if fear was the fastest way to keep soldiers in line, then fear was the weapon he chose. His uniform was always immaculate, his medals perfectly ranged. But behind the shine was a man who measured his worth not in lives saved, but in promotions earned. Sergeant Luke Harris was the opposite. Born in a small town in Iowa, he enlisted at 19 with no dreams of glory, just a deep sense of duty and a desire to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Harris had been through hell in Afghanistan. The IED blast that nearly took his leg also took two of his closest friends. He carried their memory with him every day, along with the shrapnel still lodged near his knee. Unlike Kane, Harris never sought recognition. His Purple Heart wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder of the price of service. He believed leadership meant lifting others up, not tearing them down. To the younger soldiers, Harris was a quiet mentor, a man who would stay behind after drills to help them improve, even when his own leg ached with pain. To Kane, however, that humility was weakness. In Kane's mind, Harris's limp was a flaw, a blemish that tarnished the image of Bravo Company, and that blemish needed to be reminded of his place. The clash between them wasn't just personal, it was inevitable. One saw leadership as domination, the other saw it as service, and only one of them would walk away with his pride intact. The orders came down on a humid Thursday morning. Bravo Company was being deployed for an extended field training exercise deep in the Carolina backwoods. On paper, it was just another multi-day mission, navigation drills, simulated combat, and survival training. But for Captain Kane, it was something more, a stage to prove his dominance. He briefed the men in his usual sharp, cold tone. "We'll be pushing hard. No excuses, no mercy. You fall behind, you're a liability. And in my unit, liabilities don't last." His eyes deliberately locked on Harris. "Understood." Harris gave a curt nod. "Understood, sir." The company moved out that afternoon, heavy packs on their backs, weapons slung over their shoulders. The air was thick with heat and humidity, and every step stirred up clouds of dust and gnats. Harris felt the familiar, grinding ache in his knee, but he kept his pace steady. Kane, however, wasn't content to let the mission unfold naturally. He began pushing the tempo harder, barking orders to double time it through steep inclines, knowing exactly who would struggle most. By the second day, Harris's knee was swelling, the pain shooting up his thigh with every step. Still, he refused to show weakness. That stubborn resilience only seemed to irritate Kane more. It was on the third night, during a simulated night assault, that things took a darker turn. Kane assigned Harris to the point team, the position most exposed to enemy fire in the exercise. It was an unusual choice for someone still recovering from a major injury, but Kane justified it with a smirk. "If you can't lead from the front, you don't belong here." The mission was brutal, crawling through mud, scaling a steep embankment, maneuvering through dense thickets. Harris powered through, even when his legs screamed in protest. But Kane wasn't satisfied. That night, as the men set up camp, Kane approached Harris with a mocking grin. "Not bad, Sergeant. You only slowed us down a little this time." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Maybe there's hope for you yet. Or maybe you'll just collapse tomorrow. We'll see." Harris met his eyes, silent but unflinching. The seed of vengeance that Kane had planted weeks ago was no longer just buried. It was growing. And soon, Kane would give Harris the perfect chance to return the favor. By the fourth day in the Carolina wilderness, Bravo Company was running on fumes. The endless drills, the blistering heat, and the lack of sleep had stripped every man down to raw instinct. But for Sergeant Luke Harris, the real battle wasn't against the terrain. It was against the man leading them. Captain Kane had turned the field exercise into a personal gauntlet for Harris. Every opportunity to assign him the heaviest load, the most punishing tasks, or the longest watch shifts, Kane took it. And each time, he did it with that same smug expression, as if daring Harris to break. It all came to a head during a river crossing. The unit had to wade chest deep through a rushing current with full packs. Harris was halfway across when his weakened knee buckled. He stumbled, fighting to keep his footing. From the far bank, Kane's voice cut through the roar of the water. "Move it, Harris. Or do you need me to send someone in to carry you like a child?" The words stung sharper than the icy current. The other soldiers looked away, embarrassed for him, but no one spoke. Harris gritted his teeth, forced his leg to lock, and powered through to the other side. By the time they reached camp that night, Harris's knee was throbbing. He set to wrap it, but Kane wasn't done. The captain strode over, kicking at the dirt near Harris's boots. "You think wrapping that leg will make you a soldier again? Hate to break it to you, Sergeant, but medals don't heal weakness." Harris looked up, his voice low but steady. "And you think humiliating men makes you a leader?" "Sir." The air froze. The nearby soldiers went dead silent. Kane's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing to cold slits. "Careful, Harris. You're already on thin ice." But for Harris, something had shifted. Kane could push him, mock him, and try to strip him of dignity, but the breaking point had been reached. Kane had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. That night, as Harris sat by the dim glow of the campfire, a single thought burned in his mind. You'll regret this. And fate was already setting the stage for the moment that would turn Kane's arrogance into his downfall. In the army, gossip travels faster than a bullet. By the end of the week, everyone in Bravo Company knew about the river incident, the humiliation, the way Captain Kane had pushed Sergeant Harris to the brink in front of everyone. But Harris wasn't the only one Kane had crossed. His reign of arrogance had left plenty of bruises, some visible, most not. Soldiers who had been denied leave for family emergencies. Men who had been publicly dressed down for mistakes Kane himself had caused. Promotions mysteriously blocked, recommendations lost in paperwork. It was only a matter of time before the quiet grumbling turned into something more. Around campfires and in low whispers inside the barracks tents, Kane's name became a curse. Man's a damn tyrant. Guy's gonna get someone killed. Wish someone would put him in his place. Harris never encouraged it, but he listened. And the more he listened, the clearer it became. Kane's power rested on fear, and fear could be broken. Corporal Jamie Ortiz, one of the youngest in the unit, sat beside Harris one night as they cleaned their rifles. He hesitated before speaking. "Sarge, we've all seen what he's doing to you. You don't deserve it." "Hell, none of us do." Harris looked at him evenly. "The Army's full of guys like him. You keep your head down and do your job." Ortiz shook his head. "Yeah, but sometimes somebody's gotta do more than that." The words stuck with Harris. He'd been trained to follow the chain of command, to play by the rules. But Kane had shown him something important. Kane didn't play by the rules, and maybe that's why Harris couldn't either. The whispers weren't just talk anymore. They were fuel. And soon, Kane was going to give Harris and every soldier he'd wronged the perfect opportunity to strike back. The rain started on the 6th day. Not the light, refreshing kind, but a relentless, cold downpour that soaked uniforms, clogged boots with mud, and turned every hill into a slippery slope. Bravo Company was deep in the wilderness, running a simulated search and rescue drill. The objective was simple: locate a downed pilot somewhere in a 5-mile radius, and extract him before enemy forces could reach him. Captain Kane, naturally, took the lead. But instead of assigning positions based on skill and stamina, he made decisions that reeked of ego. Harris, despite his injury, was again given the most physically demanding role: point man on the forward recon team. Kane seemed convinced this was another chance to break him. But then something happened Kane didn't plan for. By midday, the rain turned the forest into a swamp. Kane's navigation was sloppy. His usual confidence faltered as visibility dropped to almost nothing. Several times, Harris had to quietly correct their course to keep them from wandering in circles. Then came the creek crossing. The water was high from the rain, rushing fast, the banks slick with mud. Kane, determined to prove his toughness, insisted on going first. Halfway across, his boots slipped on a submerged rock. In an instant, he was down, the current ripping him off balance. His pack dragged him under, and his rifle went spinning away in the torrent. "Sir," Harris's voice cut through the storm. Without hesitation, he dropped his pack and lunged into the water. The current was fierce, but Harris powered forward, ignoring the agony in his knee. He reached Kane, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him upright before the water could swallow him completely. For a moment, their eyes met, Kane's wide with panic, Harris's steady and cold. Harris didn't say a word as he hauled him to the far bank, shoving him onto solid ground. The rest of the squad rushed over. Ortiz slapped Harris on the shoulder. "Hell of a save, Sarge," Kane coughed, trying to catch his breath. But the look in his eyes wasn't gratitude. It was humiliation. He had been the one exposed. The man he mocked had just saved his life in front of the entire unit. And Harris knew something Kane didn't. That was only the beginning. The rescue changed everything, but not in the way Kane wanted. In the Army, reputation is currency, and Kane's had just taken a massive hit. The man who strutted around like an untouchable force of nature had been dragged from a raging creek by the very soldier he'd spent weeks ridiculing. Word spread through Bravo Company like wildfire, and the whispers weren't whispers anymore. "Guess Sarge Harris is the real leader out here. Funny how Kane talks big until he's drowning. Man owes Harris his life, and he can't even say thank you." Kane could feel control slipping through his fingers. Every sidelong glance, every half-suppressed smirk from the men was a reminder that his authority had a crack in it. And Harris could see the fracture widening. But Harris wasn't interested in gloating. He wanted something more permanent, a reckoning that would strip Kane's power for good. So he waited, watched, listened. And then he saw his opening. The final phase of the field exercise was a high-stakes navigation and endurance challenge. Each squad leader was responsible for guiding his team through a series of checkpoints scattered miles apart. It was the perfect scenario for a leader to either shine or fail spectacularly. Harris approached Ortiz quietly one evening as they broke down camp. "How's your land nav, Ortiz?" "Better than Kane's, that's for sure." "That's what I thought," Harris said with a faint smile. "Let's make sure everyone sees that. It wasn't sabotage, not in the strictest sense." Harris wasn't about to break military law. But if Kane's own arrogance could be nudged into exposing his incompetence, then the truth would take care of the rest. The plan was simple. Let Kane lead himself into trouble. Don't correct him when he strays off course. Let his ego push him deeper into mistakes until the results were undeniable. By the next morning, Bravo Company set out for the final challenge. The air was heavy with tension, but not the kind Kane was used to commanding. This time, it wasn't fear of him. It was anticipation of what was coming. Harris walked silently at the rear of the formation, watching Kane march forward with false confidence, compass in hand, and straight toward his own downfall. The forest seemed endless. Thick branches clawed at uniforms, mud sucked at boots, and the damp air clung to every breath. Captain Kane marched at the front, barking orders, his compass clutched like a badge of honor. But Harris knew the truth. Kane wasn't leading them toward the next checkpoint. He was leading them deeper into nowhere. At first, the men followed in silence. But as the hours dragged on, murmurs began to rise. Ortiz exchanged a glance with Harris. The plan was working. "Sir, are you sure this is the right heading?" Private Jacobs finally asked. Kane whipped around, eyes blazing. "You questioning my navigation?" "Soldier," Jacobs stiffened. "No, sir. Just thought we were supposed to be moving northwest, not south." Kane jabbed a finger at his map. "I know exactly where we are. Keep moving." But they didn't reach the checkpoint. By nightfall, they were miles off course, exhausted, and dangerously low on supplies. Kane's frustration boiled over. He snapped at anyone who spoke, deflecting blame onto the terrain, the weather, anything but himself. That was when Harris made his move. He stepped forward, voice calm but carrying weight. "Sir, permission to lead us back on track." Kane glared. "And why would I let a limping desk jockey take command?" "Because right now, sir," Harris said, locking eyes with him, "you've got us lost, hungry, and hours from where we need to be. This isn't about ego anymore. It's about getting the men home." The silence that followed was heavier than the humid night air. Every soldier was watching. Kane's jaw tightened, but he could see the truth in their faces. They no longer believed in him. Reluctantly, he stepped back. "Fine. Do it your way." Harris didn't gloat. He simply took the map, checked his compass, and issued crisp, confident orders. Within 2 hours, they were back on course, the first checkpoint in sight. When they reached camp, the instructors overseeing the exercise had already heard about the debacle. Kane was pulled aside for a private discussion, the kind that could derail a career. The men gathered around Harris that night, not as subordinates, but as brothers. Ortiz clapped him on the back. "Guess we know who the real leader is." Kane sat alone by the dying fire, staring into the flames. He had been humiliated, exposed, and worst of all, saved by the man he'd tried to break. And Harris? He didn't need to say a word. The battlefield had delivered his revenge for him. The field exercise ended 2 days later, but the fallout from Kane's humiliation was only beginning. When Bravo Company returned to base, the debrief was brutal. The evaluators didn't sugarcoat it. Kane's leadership during the navigation phase had been reckless, disorganized, and detrimental to mission success. Those words, in military terms, were a death sentence for anyone aiming higher in rank. Kane kept his composure in the room, but Harris could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. This wasn't just about losing face in front of his men. This was about losing the one thing Cain valued above all else, his career trajectory. The soldiers, on the other hand, walked a little taller. For the first time in months, the shadow of Cain's constant intimidation had lifted. Conversations around the barracks were lighter, more relaxed. The men laughed again without glancing over their shoulders. Ortiz caught up with Harris near the motor pool one afternoon. "Word is Cain's getting reassigned. Somewhere desk-bound. You had anything to do with that, Sarge?" Harris smirked faintly. "Didn't have to. He did it to himself." But the change wasn't just in the unit. Harris felt it in himself. The constant pressure, the humiliation, the bitterness, all of it had hardened into something steadier. He knew now that he could stand against anyone, even someone who held all the power. As for Cain, he avoided Harris entirely. They crossed paths only once after the reassignment rumors started. It was in the mess hall, the air heavy with unspoken history. Cain looked at Harris for a long moment, no smirk, no mocking glare, just quiet resentment, before walking past without a word. That was all Harris needed. Victory didn't have to be loud. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge was letting your enemy live with their own defeat. Weeks passed, and the rumors became reality. Captain Cain was reassigned. Officially, it was a strategic personnel transfer. Unofficially, everyone knew it was a quiet exile. His replacement was a seasoned officer with a reputation for fairness and competence. And the difference was immediate. Bravo Company thrived. Morale soared. Training ran smoother. The laughter returned, and the unspoken tension that had clung to every formation was gone. For Harris, the victory wasn't about titles or recognition. It was about restoring dignity, not just for himself, but for the men who had endured Cain's reign. He'd proven something Cain never understood. Leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about responsibility. One evening, Harris sat alone on the barracks steps, watching the sun set behind the motor pool. Ortiz joined him, holding 2 cups of burnt mess hall coffee. "You ever think Cain will figure it out?" Ortiz asked. Harris sipped his coffee, shaking his head. "Some men can't see past themselves. And when you can't see past yourself, you'll never see the people you're supposed to lead." Ortiz nodded, staring out at the fading light. "Guess you taught him a lesson, though." Harris gave a small, knowing smile. "I didn't teach him anything. Life did. I just let it happen." There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that Cain's downfall hadn't come from breaking the rules or striking back in anger. It had come from letting his own arrogance destroy him, and from Harris being strong enough to stand his ground until it happened. As the night settled in, Harris thought about the men still out there, serving under leaders like Cain. He hoped they'd remember one thing: that courage isn't just about facing the enemy. Sometimes, it's about standing up to the person who wears the same uniform. And somewhere, maybe in a dull office far from the field, Cain was living with the truth he'd never escape. The soldier he'd tried to humiliate had become the man who saved his life and ended his career. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Harris's position? Stayed silent and endured it? Or found your own way to fight back? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe real leadership is earned, not demanded, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this one.